I am Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And we're paranormal specialists who live in the most haunted city on earth, Savannah, Georgia. Every day is Halloween in our line of work, so join us as we spin true tales of haunts, murders, and disturbing Savannah history. I'm Madison.
I'm Chris.
And welcome to the most haunted city on earth. Hey, ghosts and ghouls, it's me, Madison, and JT, and we are here in Sam Black Church, West Virginia, to bring you a mobile podcast on the Greenbrier ghost, the only ghost to be actively involved in their own murder trial.
All right, we are at Soul Chapel Methodist, and it is right behind me. We're about to start the podcast and tell y'all the story. I'm really excited about this because it's absolutely gorgeous. Let's go.
All right, so as you can see, we have arrived at Zona's headstone.
I'm very excited.
I'm also very excited. Shout out to the church that takes care of these headstones because they've done a phenomenal job of keeping this in excellent condition considering that she died in the 1800s and it looks so beautiful. Now, this might not be the original headstone, but you know, regardless, this was where she was buried. So, you know.
A bunch of people have left her offerings.
Yeah. Yeah, the witches of West Virginia, cool. You can tell have been here.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's the church name?
This is Soul Chapel Methodist Church.
Cool.
So,
cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, it's beautiful. It's like quaint.
It is. It's
really
very serene here for sure. But let's go ahead and get into the story, which is why all of you are here. So, Zona here, she was born Zona Hester, and she ended up marrying a man named Edward Shue. His nickname was Trout.
Hey, Trout.
I'm like, girl, you should have known better to not marry a man named Trout. But but she was from Lewisburg, West Virginia, which is about 20 minutes away from where we are right now.
Mm-hmm.
And she married Trout, and she was only married to him for 3 months before the incident occurred.
Wow.
Yeah.
He really got to it, huh?
Uh-huh. Well, you'll hear some warning signs that may have piqued my interest.
I know the basis of all this.
Yeah.
Madison told me just a little bit about the Greenbrier ghost, but I know none of
the nitty-gritty details.
Guts.
Yeah. There's some twists and turns to this story.
I'm lit.
So hold on to your hats, I guess. But a little bit of the history. So a lot of the evidence that we get are accounts from the only man who was still alive to be interviewed about this particular incident long ago. And his name was Anderson Jones. So a lot of this information is going to be from the perspective of Anderson Jones because he was heavily involved with this case.
Gotcha.
So only one witness to events following the discovery of Mrs. Shue's body and later the sensational trial was still living. His name was Anderson Jones. He was a respected resident living out in Lewisburg. Mm-hmm. Jones can vividly recall the startling events. His recitation of the fantastic mystery is given ample corroboration by court records.
Okay.
So, Jones said that he was about 11 years old in November of 1896 when Shue married Miss Zona Hester of Meadow Bluff District at the Old Methodist Church in Livesay's Mill. After the wedding, they took up residence in a small 2-story frame building that had been the residence of the late William G. Livesay, who gave the settlement its name.
Okay.
Edward Trout Shue was a former resident of Pocahontas County, and yeah, I know, I know.
All right.
And he
You
had.
sure Disney's not going to sue them?
Right. Oh, well, we can go into the whole
Yeah, I know.
history of Pocahontas, but regardless, he had come to Greenbrier a short time before the wedding to work for James Crookshanks, no relation to the cat from Harry Potter, at his blacksmith shop. A towering man of unknown strength, he presented a striking figure as he forged shoes before the flaming fires. He was a big guy, apparently.
Okay.
So, despite his previous marriages to two other women, both of whom died suddenly, yeah. I just want to
What?
preface that.
So hold on, whoa. This guy's a serial killer?
Basically, yeah.
Oh my
He
lord.
killed his other two wives. I mean, that is not,
Yeah, I know.
recorded.
Well,
but
I mean,
exactly.
yeah, let's ask Zona.
Yeah, right.
Right?
So young Miss Hester fell madly in love with Trout Shoe, and after a brief courtship, they were married. And their little home seemed complete with happiness. No one would ever suspect that it would end in tragedy.
Oh wow.
So during the first days of January 1897, Miss Shue fell ill. For several weeks, she was under the care of Dr. J.M. Knapp. Shue appeared very attentive to his bride's needs, giving no cause for suspicion of what was in his mind. Early on the morning of January 22nd, right before your birthday,
Yeah.
he appeared at the cabin of Aunt Martha Jones, who was the mother of Anderson Jones, to ask if Anderson could go to his house and attend to some chores for Miss Shue. In an interview, Jones clearly recalled that memorable day. He said, "I can remember it well. It was a Saturday. Mom told Mr. Shue I had to go to Dr. Knapp's first and finish some work there. He seemed to resent this, but asked if I could go later in the day. 4 times he came back to the house for me in that day. He came back 4 times.
Wow.
Each time I was busy. About 1 p.m. he came again and I agreed to run his errand. Going to the house, I felt that something was wrong. All the doors were closed and there was an air about the place I did not like. Reaching the steps, I saw a trail of blood. That scared me, but I went to the door and knocked. No one answered. I tried it and, finding the door unlocked, walked into the kitchen. The trail of blood continued across the floor to the dining room. This door too was closed. Once more, I knocked, and getting no answer, walked in. I stumbled over Mrs. Shue's body. There she was, stretched out on the floor, looking right up at me through wide open eyes. She seemed to be laughing.
There's something actually super, like, creepy about this because we're right next to her skeletal remains,
Yeah.
reading about her murder. It's actually
Kind of unnerving.
it's very unnerving.
Yeah.
Nah, like this is actually the first time that I've been all happy this morning, like really excited and all of that. But this is actually the first time
She had a really
I'm feeling
brutal
something.
Well, yeah, she had a really brutal death, and it's very fair
Yeah.
to feel emotions that are like, wow, this is a real story. We talk about ghost stories all the time,
Yeah.
but it's not like we were present for the story or things like that. But when you have that connection like this, which is why I wanted to do it by her.
We're literally 6 feet away from her.
Yeah.
That's wild. That's actually. Anyway, all right.
Yeah.
I guess
But
we'll
yeah,
keep going.
but that is why I wanted to do it next to her headstone, because I mean it is important to continue on her story because
Yeah.
it's a very sad story, but
That's our job.
yeah,
Storytellers.
yeah. So I was frightened but still able to reach down and shake her. She was stiff and cold. Running from the house, I called across the field to Aunt Martha. "Mrs. Shue is dead." As she ran to the house, I went down the road for Mr. Shue, finding him at the blacksmith shop with Charles Tapscott. When I told him what I had found, he yelled and, with Mr. Tapscott, started for the house. I continued on to get Dr. Knapp.
Before we continue, let's head over to Zona and Trout's old house. All right, everybody, we are headed to where Zona was killed by Trout. And it is just absolutely gorgeous up here. We're following a man's directions who stopped and talked to Mr. Warren Hunter, and we're looking for a house up on a hill.
The road said that it dead ends, so we're just going to keep going until it doesn't let us anymore.
Oh yeah. Oh, I see something. Hold on.
Hold on.
I see something. this?
So we found the house where Zona and Edward Trout Shue ended up living together, and where Edward would ultimately kill Zona. Luckily, we met a man named Mr. Warren Hunter, and he gave us directions on how to get here. There is no trace of how to find this place on the internet, which makes a lot of sense because it's kind of tricky, a lot of back roads and things like that. But the house is still here. It is still very beautiful. Whoever's living there really has kept it well intact, especially for a house from the 1800s. But yeah, it's super pretty.
And now back to Zona's gravesite.
When we reached the house, Shue had taken his wife from the floor, placed her on the bed, and held her head in his arms, crying for her to come back. Psychopath.
Yes, absolutely.
Anyways.
That's what I was just about to say.
Psychopath.
This guy, no better than Bundy.
But strangest of all, although no one thought of it at the time, he had dressed Mrs. Shue, placing one of those old-fashioned high, stiff collars around her neck and holding it in place with some kind of scarf.
Okay.
Definitely remember that detail, y'all, because it's going to come into play later on. Now, Dr. Knapp immediately started an investigation to determine if Mrs. Shue was still alive. Throughout his efforts to revive the woman, Shue continued to hold her head, refusing to let him examine it.
Wow.
That's
Yep.
try not to be too obvious, dude, but anyways. Finally, the doctor turned and said, "It's an everlasting faint. Her heart has failed."
Oh, love that. I mean, I love the everlasting faint.
Yeah,
Like,
it's very poetic.
it's so poetic.
Yeah.
These doctors over here, like, you know,
Dropping
dropping poems.
poetry.
Gracious. All right.
But the next morning, Mrs. Shue's body, accompanied by her husband and several neighbors, was taken over the mountain to Mrs. Hester's home, her mother. On Monday, she was buried in the little family graveyard high up on the side of the mountain. In the interim, before the funeral, Shue never once left his dead wife's side in the presence of others. When not at the coffin, he permitted no one else to go near it, not even her mother. Taking his place at the head of the corpse, he guarded it closely. In addition, he placed a folded sheet on one side of his wife's head and some nondescript garment on the other. They served to keep it in an upright position.
Okay.
Now, this is after the funeral. We go into the dream,
Okay.
which involves Zona's mother. Several days after the funeral, Mrs. Hester was awakened from her slumber by a noise in the little cabin room. Startled, she recalled constant prayers since her daughter's death, seeking the real solution to it. She didn't believe that her daughter died of heart failure.
Sure. Well, of course not.
Yeah.
There's blood. Like, I mean, come
Yeah,
on.
there's blood, and also it's just
Let's be
the
real
fact that
here.
her daughter was young.
Yeah.
Like, and yes, like, you know, back in the 1800s, life expectancy wasn't as great, but she was perfectly healthy.
Yeah, but she was perfectly healthy. There's blood all over the place, and it's heart failure all of a sudden?
Exactly.
I don't understand.
Exactly.
Okay.
So,
Well, it's weird.
so maybe they were about to be answered. Peering through the darkened room, Mrs. Hester made out an object. It was her daughter, dressed in the very dress she had died in.
Oh, wow.
The young girl seemed about to speak, but when her mother reached out her hand seeking the coffin, the girl disappeared. The next night, Mrs. Hester resumed her prayers, praying long and earnestly that her daughter would return to explain her death. Once more, they were answered. Mrs. Shue talked more freely, giving her mother to understand the understanding she so desperately wanted with the whole mysterious affair.
Yeah.
A third visit was followed by a fourth before the murdered woman told her mother the entire circumstances surrounding her death. Secure in the knowledge that her son-in-law was the murderer, Mrs. Hester set out to trap him.
Oh, boy.
Nothing is like a scorned mother.
I swear.
So, you know,
I swear.
it's true. Both of our moms, if
Oh, yeah.
like if you killed me, my mom would come after you so fast. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to kill you, babe.
Thank you. No, I appreciate
But,
that.
but if anyone killed either one of us, I know my mother would, my mother's
Yeah.
like brutal.
Yeah.
And I think she'd just come up and just take
She'd-
them out. She'd be the law. Anyway.
Anyways, but yeah. At first, it was not easy. Neighbors listened a little sadly to the unusual story, but merely shook their heads. authorities offered little additional comfort. So now we start into the process of trying to figure out what happened.
Okay.
So, several days later, Johnson Hester, a brother in law, satisfied that the story had some foundation to it, went over the mountain to Livesay Mill to talk with Shue. Their conversation further aroused his suspicions. Then, after talking with Anderson Jones and others who had been present at the house when his niece's body was found, the uncle was convinced the girl was a victim of foul play. Together,
Duh.
Mr. Hester and his sister-in-law went to Lewisburg for a conference with prosecuting attorney John A. Preston, one of the most sought-after lawyers of his day. Preston already had heard of the weird story which had spread around the country like wildfire, but he gave little credence to it. Now, this girl's mother was before him, sincere in her efforts to trap a murderer, firm in the belief that what she had to tell was true. Her brother-in-law also was there to add his suspicions and gathered from neighbors. Now, for several hours the three conversed. When they concluded the meeting, Attorney Preston started the wheels of justice, moving toward one of the strangest and most fantastic murder trials ever had.
Ooh.
Now, first he had questioned Dr. Knapp. That kindly old physician admitted his verdict of heart failure as the cause of Mrs. Shue's death could be wrong. He even said it himself. That
Yeah.
He was like,
Of course.
She had been ailing, but circumstances surrounding her death had even given him some cause for suspicion. Both men agreed an autopsy would prove whether or not Mrs. Hester's strange theory was true. If it was not, the examination would at least serve to relieve the aching heart of a saddened mother and throw undue suspicion from the shoulders of Trout Shue. The next day, Preston and Dr. Knapp went to Livesay's mill, informed Shue of their plans, and ordered him to accompany them over the mountain to his wife's grave.
Get him.
Yeah. In addition, they took Aunt Martha and little Anderson.
They came here.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And they also took Aunt Martha and little Anderson along. This poor 11-year-old boy is
I
just
know.
getting dragged into this murder trial, but I'm glad he did because he gave us so much interesting insight to this.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome.
Shue vigorously protested against such actions, but
I'm sure he did.
well, yeah, of course,
I'm sure he did.
but dared not refuse to accompany the little investigating party. Throughout the long journey, he kept muttering, "I don't know what in the name of God they are talking her up for. They are not."
Nice Trout impression there.
Yeah, they are not going to find anything. But he was wrong.
Good.
Reaching the mountain grave, Preston ordered several neighbors to exhume the body of Mrs. Shue. Such action, although commonplace today, had never been heard of in Greenbrier County. So it was only after considerable argument and threats of arrest that Preston succeeded in having the coffin raised from the grave and carried up the road to the schoolhouse. Shue was taken along to the little building, then required to remain in the room while Dr. Knapp performed his autopsy. First, the physician searched for poison, but found no trace of it. He worked over the body for 3 days and nights, seeking a cause of death. Dr. Knapp was determined
Yeah.
to find this.
Well, duh.
Yeah.
No one has heart failure and then there's blood everywhere.
Exactly.
That's the thing I can't figure out. I'm going to ask him at the courthouse when we go.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Also, if you, all of this information that she's reading, will include the sources
Yeah.
from where she's found everything, so y'all can do your own research if you want, because
Yeah.
there's a couple holes that I'm finding too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Now, and also, I do always like to preface, when it comes to these stories and stuff, a lot of times in the 1800s and earlier, things weren't recorded properly, or
Yeah,
things weren't
yeah.
always, like some things are left out,
Sure.
things of that sometimes they don't survive to the point where we can find them and do research. So, a lot of this we do rely on from, local people who tell stories.
Yeah, and if
that,
you're just joining us, we're actually from Savannah.
Yeah.
And we do a ton on Savannah hauntings, but we want to, now that we have a Patreon and all of that, we want to go out and start and talk about and doing podcasts, mobile podcasts at actual haunted places. So that's what we're doing here. This is our first one.
Yep. So during the time of the autopsy, Shu visibly was nervous, but maintaining his innocence, sat in a large packing box, whittling on with his knife. Anderson Jones was there during the entire examination. On the third day, Dr. Knapp was about to give up when he made a startling discovery that Mrs. Hester had predicted. Jones said Dr. Knapp was working around Mrs. Shu's head.
Oh boy.
I could see Shu was getting more nervous. His
Oh
whittling
boy.
was not so good. Suddenly, the doctor turned to Mr. Preston. They whispered together for a few minutes. Then Mr. Preston turned to Shu and said, "Well, Shu, we have found your wife's neck to be broken." Shu's head dropped. A change came over him that cannot, according to Anderson Jones, that he said he cannot explain, but definitely showed guilt.
Wow.
Mrs. Shu's
So where'd the
body.
blood come from? If she has a broken neck, where'd the blood come from?
Well, we're getting there.
Okay.
So.
Okay. You're right, I'm jumping ahead.
Miss Shu's body was placed once more in the little grave, its revenge complete. She was placed under arrest by Sheriff Hill Nickel. The authorities started back with
Good.
him to his home at Livesay's Mill. Arriving at the house the next day, Shu seemed in brighter spirits and offered the party breakfast. When he's trying to be like,
Yeah, he's like, y'all want some eggs? Y'all want some?
You want a
y'all want some
biscuit?
sausage? I got some fresh biscuits in the oven.
Yeah, I can't kill people. And I make
Me?
When they accepted, he cooked the meal himself and announced he was ready to go to jail. At Lewisburg, he was charged with the murder of Mrs. Shu and placed in the county jail without bond to await the June term of Greenbrier County Circuit Court, which we'll be going to in a little bit,
Yes.
for a trial before Judge J.M. McHorder.
Now, let's head over to the courtroom where Trout Shu was convicted of murder. All right, everybody. The two super nice police officers said that we can come in and film in the courthouse that Trout Shu was convicted of murder in, and they confirmed it. They confirmed what happened, and here we are.
So we're currently in the exact courtroom where Edward Trout Shu would be convicted for the murder of his wife Zona. And this also is the exact courtroom where Zona's mother would recount her dreams that she had that in turn convicted Edward. It is very, very much so kind of like a feeling that it feels like what it would have looked like back in the 1800s. Of course, the carpet's different, but like the pews and the way that it just, it exudes an energy that feels very antique and also kind of creepy, not gonna lie.
And now, back to Zona's gravesite.
Prosecuting Attorney Preston and his assistant, Henry Gilmer, spent several months seeking additional evidence against Shu, both fearing the testimony of Mrs. Hester would not convict their prisoner. In the meantime, Shu obtained Dr. William Rucker and James P.D. Gardner to defend him. Gardner, an African-American attorney, was the first of his race ever to practice in the county court.
Nice.
Yeah, so
That's awesome.
that's a fun fact. Now, the trial, going into the trial, the case finally came before...
Let's convict him.
I know, right?
I want him,
What
I
everybody
want him
wants.
gone.
Yes. The case finally came about the court on June 30th. The little courtroom, still used today, known as the Greenbrier Circuit Court, was taxed to capacity by neighbors from both sides of Sewell Mountain.
Sewell? Sorry. I don't know why. What's wrong with me?
Some came to testify, others to hear Mrs. Hester's recital of her dreams. Little difficulty was encountered in securing a jury, of course, because I would also want to sit on that jury.
Of course you would.
Yeah, within an hour, the trial was on. In an opening argument, Attorney Preston told the jury that the state's case against Shu was entirely circumstantial, but that the evidence was such as had never been presented in any court before.
Wow.
He stressed that the dream testimony to be presented would prove beyond doubt to be authentic and informed the jurors he could prove it. Dr. Knapp was the first witness called. He told of conducting the post-mortem examination and finding Mrs. Shu's death had resulted from a broken neck, dislocated so perfectly that it escaped his observation for 3 days.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So what? We're talking like Shu is like a smart guy?
Yeah,
Oh my
apparently.
god.
Yeah.
What? Like
Yeah.
he's smart enough to like dislocate a neck to where a doctor can't see
Well,
it?
yeah, and that's the point. And he put the high, stiff collar on her neck so they couldn't tell.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
He dressed her that way.
Oh, yeah, I know, but that's
Yeah.
crazy.
It is. At the same time, the physician pointed out that the break was of such a nature Mrs. Shu could not have done it in a suicide attempt.
No.
Yeah. He further disclosed no evidence of how she had subjected herself to violence. The physician declared he made the usual examination when Mrs. Shu was found dead and had pronounced her demise due to heart failure only after Shu had refused to relinquish his wife's head, requesting him not to examine it. Anderson, of course, duh.
Stupid request.
Yeah, Anderson Jones testified to the defendant's repeated efforts to get him to go to the house and see if his wife wanted anything. Then Jones told of finding the body. Other witnesses stated Shu was the only person seen about or known to have been in the house that morning before his wife was found dead. Others told how he assisted in dressing Mrs. Shu and, in doing so, placed a high, stiff collar around her neck. Then he added a large veil, several times folded and tied in a large bow under the chin around the collar. Still, other witnesses related how the victim's head appeared to be very loose at the neck and, when not supported, dropped from side to side. Others testified that in his conversation and conduct with after Mrs. Shu's death, the defendant failed to show a proper appreciation of the loss he had sustained
Okay.
because he was a psychopath and he's just faking it.
Yeah.
One testified that when Shu had been summoned to the post-mortem and inquest over at Sewell, the defendant declared he would come back under arrest, but they knew they could not prove him guilty of murder. All of this testimony was leading up to the expected dramatic appearance of Mrs. Hester.
Yes.
Yes.
Bring her in.
Everything so far was purely circumstantial, and if Shu denied it, there was an equal chance of being freed of the crime. Never before in the history of American courts had a jury been asked to convict a defendant on the testimony that resulted from a dream.
That is wild.
It really is. Finally, the aged mother was called to the stand with an air of determination. She told
Get him.
how she had been unsatisfied about the cause of her daughter's death and how she had prayed that Mrs. Shu might return from her grave and solve the mystery. She told of the daughter's 4 separate visits to her little bedroom and how the girl described her own death at the hands of a scheming and brutal husband.
Nice.
Attorney Preston knew undue elaboration on Mrs. Hester's dream would make them too fantastic for any jury to believe, so merely traced them lightly with his star witness.
Smart.
He further realized defense attorneys would try to break down this startling testimony. Then his case would be won, just as Mrs. Hester had won him over from his efforts to break her story down as one of a vivid imagination. Dr. Rucker, defense counsel, lost no time in getting at the dreams, unaware of their full significance. He endeavored to blast them out of the courtroom as a start for his defense. At this point, the testimony found in Lewisburg court records can better appreciate the story. So important was it considered that Thomas H. Dennis, the then editor of the Greenbrier Independent at Lewisburg, printed the entire question and answer testimony, something rarely resorted to by newspapers before the present decade.
Wow.
Shu spent nearly an entire day on the witness stand seeking to build a defense for himself. He talked at great length and was very minute in particular in describing unimportant events, but denied practically everything testified to by other witnesses. He entered a positive denial of the charge against him, terming the prosecution spite work. In closing, he vehemently protested his innocence, calling on God to witness. I can't say it enough. Psychopath.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Though admitting he had served a term in the penitentiary, he declared he loved his late wife dearly and appealed to members of the jury to look into his eyes and
Yeah,
then
okay.
say if he was guilty.
Whatever.
But this man's testimony and his desperate efforts failed to sway the jury, but it made a most unfavorable impression. So great did the state's case appear against him that Mr. Dennis, editor of the Greenbrier Independent, wrote in his paper, "There's no middle ground for the jury to take. The verdict inevitably must be for murder in the first degree or an acquittal." After lengthy arguments of the evidence by counsel for both the state and the defendant, Shue's case was given to the jury. This body solemnly filed from the room to perform their duty, returning in an hour with a verdict of murder in the first degree, but recommending life imprisonment.
Ah.
After the verdict had been announced, Mr. Dennis again wrote in his paper, taking the verdict of the jury as ascertaining the truth, we must conclude that Shu deliberately broke his wife's neck, probably with his strong hands and with no other motive than to be rid of her so that he might get another one to more to his liking.
That's the motive. That's what
Yes.
my number one question up to this point was. Why did
Why?
he do it? Was there money involved? What
Yeah.
did he believe that she cheated on him or something like
No.
that? No, it's solely because he is absolutely a
Bad
bad
man.
person. Just a monster.
Yeah. I'm so
And
sorry, Zona.
yeah, seriously.
Jeez. But when it's the fact that his other two wives died
Yeah. He's
suddenly.
cycling
Yeah.
through for sure.
And so the 12-man jury and many spectators in the courtroom did not see eye to eye eye for eye in regards to a proper verdict. Many persons not connected with the trial expressing the opinion that the death penalty should have been imposed.
Yes.
And that's where we go into the aftermath after the trial.
Oh boy. Wait, hold on. You didn't tell me about the blood. You said we're
Yeah.
getting there.
Well, so that's the thing, is the blood was never discussed. What? So that makes me wonder if Anderson didn't add that as like a,
Yeah. I'm asking
or
at the courthouse.
or was she beaten of sorts? Because clearly he was a
That's
violent
that's
guy.
probably way more.
Yeah.
I at first like pictured a massive streak of blood, but maybe
Yeah.
he's following like trickles.
Yeah.
That would make more sense. And I am gonna ask at the courthouse if we find someone very knowledgeable about this, and
Yeah.
like a historian, and we interview them, which I'm gonna ask to do.
Yeah.
I'm gonna. That's like one of my questions.
Yeah.
So anyway, aftermath.
Absolutely. So rumors of mob violence grew. Sentiment crystallized. On the Sunday following Shu's conviction, a small mob gathered at Meadow Bluff campgrounds to take the prisoner from his cell in the county jail and hang him.
Yeah.
Shu's fate, the mob decreed, should be the same he had judged and carried out for his innocent wife, death by a broken neck.
Ooh.
At 10 o'clock, they gathered at their rendezvous 8 miles from Lewisburg. One man, however, decided his neighbors were making a terrible mistake. Let them do it, honestly,
No, but then they'll get
I guess.
convicted.
He was George M. Hurrah.
Hurrah.
Hearing of the plan, Hurrah mounted his horse and hurried to the house of Sheriff Nickel at Meadow Bluff. Both men started for Lewisburg to protect the prisoner, but to reach there had to pass the campgrounds. Somebody in the mob recognized the sheriff as he sped down the road past the grounds on his horse. Several would-be lynchers gave chase. They captured the two men at the point of pistols. Sheriff Nickel drew his gun and was about to fire despite overwhelming odds when he recognized his assailant. Deciding to kill the gunman, even at the cost of his own life, the sheriff tried moral persuasion. Mob leaders went with him to the nearby home of D.A. Dwyer. There, after a considerable argument, Sheriff Nickel won his point. The mob disbanded, giving him the new stout rope with which they had planned to carry out the hanging of Shu.
Okay.
2 days elapsed before Shu was removed from Moundsville Penitentiary to serve the remainder of his life. He died there 8 years later.
All right.
So, Zona would, and that would mean that Zona would become the Greenbrier ghost of sorts, and because she was the only spirit to actively participate in the conviction of her own murder.
Which is super cool. That's really cool, Zona.
Yes, good
Really
for you.
cool.
Honestly, Like that's like I like this story a lot because it just ties up so nicely
Yeah,
because she got justice. The man ended up, dying in prison, and so that way he was never able to hurt another
absolutely.
woman.
Honestly, this needs a movie.
It
We need
really
a, we I
does.
would love to make this movie because I already love it up here. It's like 70 degrees. It feels
Yeah.
amazing. And I would love to come up here and tell her story. Well, I mean, we are telling her story
Yeah.
visually, obviously for a YouTube video. But I would love to tell it in a very theatrical way. Also, have you noticed, Madison? I wanted to point this out since the beginning, but look, do you see all of the clovers, all of the clovers over her grave and nowhere else?
Yeah, I did
What is
notice
that?
that.
That is wild.
I mean, so there's a lot of reasons for things like that. It could just because there's so much energy put into
Yeah,
this area. Because unfortunately, even though the headstones here are so beautiful, it's really hard to tell anybody else's identity in this
sure.
cemetery because they're just so old and they're not as well taken care of as Zona's, obviously. Personally, I just think that there's like an air of protection to
Yeah,
it, which sometimes you do see clovers because clovers do have
I
properties
can
of
agree with that.
protection.
Well, I gotta say this is a really gorgeous place,
It is.
and I'm really excited to go to this courthouse and
And discuss.
discuss things.
They do have the papers still at the courthouse, some of them,
I'm going to
from
be
the
getting
court
shots of all
records.
that,
Yeah.
so you can check that out on YouTube if you're just listening. But yeah, y'all, I mean, this is a really really interesting case,
Yeah.
and I think I love that West Virginia acknowledges it like they do, like they put
They
up a
they honor it.
yeah, they honor
Yeah.
it. They put up that historical marker. I mean, it's
Which is
really
so
really cool.
interesting because even in Savannah, a place that loves our ghosts so much,
Yeah.
our historical markers have nothing to do with our ghosts, really.
Other
They,
than the yellow fever one,
well,
kind
yeah,
of.
kind of. But that's more so people think that's more of just like a way of just disclosing like where the mass grave
Sure,
was.
sure.
But still, even that's historical.
Absolutely. I mean,
You know,
this is a really really
it's
cool.
a very unique
It
story.
is a unique story, but it's also that that I love that it took like a cut and dry murder case where the husband kills the wife and then the husband goes to prison, and I love that it's unique because of the ghostly aspect. I mean, that's really really cool. Do you think that she haunts the graveyard that we're in right now, or do you think that
Personally, I
she's
think she's passed on
I
at this
I
point
personally think she is too.
because she got her justice.
She got her justice, and yeah, I don't know if there's anything. Now we don't obviously don't know that for sure, but I don't know if there's anything here left for her.
No. I mean, in the case of a lot of spirits, Chris talks about this often where, there's certain things that keep spirits here, unfinished
Absolutely.
business, things that, they die quickly and traumatically or whatever.
Yeah,
But I think after she got her mother to, convict her murderer, I think that was all she really needed.
I think so
And there's
too.
really no reason to haunt a place because, I mean, unless she really just wanted to stay in the hollers of West Virginia for all of eternity. But,
Yeah,
I just am not getting that vibe, you know?
yeah. No, understood. Understood. Well, if you join our Patreon, you'll get early access to all of the episodes that we do
Yeah.
coming up. We are not stopping. We are doing even more.
Yeah.
And
We're
yeah,
also going to be at Lake Shawnee Abandoned Amusement Park while we're up here. So
yep. You'll
that,
see that episode soon.
yeah.
And we on the 13th of September, we are announcing right now that we are filming at the Sorrel Weed House in downtown Savannah, one of the most haunted houses in America.
Yes.
And we are doing it in the morning and at night.
Yep.
So we'll be posting on TikTok, and we'll be uploading Patreon stuff to Patreon all day. So again, join that and get access to all of it. But thank y'all so much.
Absolutely.
Thank y'all so much
Yeah.
for listening.
And definitely keep an eye out for that Sorrel Weed House thing. Even when I was doing research there, I had plenty of experiences, and
Yeah,
so we got stories for y'all.
we're gonna be filming in very dark places with a ghost setup that I actually have crafted myself. and a ghost hunting camera setup, I should say, that I've crafted myself for that specific reason. So it's going to be really really cool. If there are if we have the possibility of catching images of ghosts, if they want to show themselves, then I believe that this setup is going to do it.
Absolutely.
All right.
But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching and listening to this really cool story. Hopefully we can do something else like this where we can sit next to somebody's grave and tell their
Yeah.
story. I kind of enjoyed this.
Really, really cool.
So awesome. Well, yep, check us out on all of our various platforms, on Patreon at patreon.com/Savannah Underground, on TikTok at the Savannah Underground, on Instagram at Savannah Underground. So just follow us on all the things. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe to stay on this side of the spooky side of YouTube. But with that being said, my name is Madison Timmons,
And I'm JT Timmons.
and stay spooky, y'all.